creating a debt trap for Africa? A debt trap is created when a country lends to poorer countries with the intent to overwhelm them with debt. This, in the long term, forces the poor country to surrender strategic assets or concede political leverage. Possible debt trap diplomacy in Africa was highlighted by the West. Countries like the United Kingdom and the US have been warning Africa to be vigilant of the soft loans and contracts that it enters into with China. But is China truly engaging in debt trap diplomacy in Africa? To understand China's role in Africa today and how it became a strategic partner for the continent, we need to travel back in time and look at the history of the relationship between the two. China and Africa initially began trading when the Ming dynasty was in power in China. The fifth and sixth voyages of the famous Zhenghe naval fleet reached the northeast coast of Africa during the first quarter of the 15th century, and after this journey, China began looking more deeply into how it wanted to interact with foreign countries. The present relationship between the two was ignited in 1955 after the first Asia-Africa conference known as the Bandung Conference. Here, Beijing tried to assert its dominance over the Third World, and by the 60s and 70s, it had successfully lured 44 of the 50 independent African countries to enter into diplomatic relationships. At that point in time, China's main incentive was to advance its communist ideology. It also aimed to prevent the recognition of Taiwan as representing China and to collect enough votes to have the idea of Taiwan representing China in the UN abandoned. China during this time period was a poor country, but it was desperate for political support and went as far as providing $2.5 billion to 36 African countries in aid from the mid-1950s to the 1970s, and eventually invested its resources to build the famous 1860-kilometer-long Tanzania-Zambia Railway. The construction of this railway was seen as a monument to the Sino-African friendship, and as a result of its extensive efforts, China was able to achieve its goal of replacing the Taiwan-based Republic of China with the People's Republic of China as a member of the UN in 1971, with help from its African friends. The end of the Cold War in the early 1990s marked a pivotal turning point in the relationship between China and Africa. Africa lost its importance to the West, and Western countries, as a result, considerably reduced how much they were investing in Africa. China, however, remained committed to creating stronger economic and trade ties with Africa in the 1980s and established forums such as the China-Africa Cooperation Forum in 2000. From the 2000 onwards, a lot of capital has been injected into Sino-African trade, which grew from $12.1 million in the 1950s to over $50 billion in 2006. By 2007, China had become Africa's second largest trading partner, second only to the United States, and by 2008, Sino-African trade had reached over $106.8 billion, representing an average annual growth rate of 30% over the last 8 years. According to World Bank data from 2020, Djibouti, Angola, and the Democratic Republic of Congo currently hold the highest external debt to China at 43%, 41%, and 29% of gross national income, respectively. This brings us to the following question. In the present, given that Beijing is no longer threatened by Taiwan, what do Chinese leaders continue to see in Africa? According to the RAND Corporation, China's keen interest in Africa is because Africa has vast reserves of natural resources. It also forms a market for Chinese exports and recognizes Beijing, so China is able to securely conduct its commercial activities on the continent. Nevertheless, trade with China is good for the growth of smaller African economies. However, empirical evidence and evidence from recent international events suggest that China is also still insecure about Taiwan, and African countries that recognize Taiwan as a country receive on average 2.7 fewer Chinese infrastructure projects every single year. So why, might you ask, does the debt trap fit into all of this? The idea that China is putting Africa into a debt trap is based purely on speculation. For Africa, China's Belt and Road Initiative was a great opportunity that included a clause whereby China would renegotiate, forgive, or even write off debts if countries that were part of the Belt and Road Initiative were unable to repay. If you want to learn more about the BRI, I'll put a link in the description box below. Coming back, this clause is in stark contrast to the debt trap claims made by the West, according to which China will eventually use these projects to control and take over African countries, which most likely will be unable to repay the loans that they've taken on. China forgave loans amounting to $40 million due from Zimbabwe in 2015, and also wrote off debt due by Addis Ababa in 2019. China's most recent generosity towards Africa was in 2022 when Mr. Wang, China's foreign minister, announced at the China-Africa Cooperation that China would waive 23 interest-free loans for 17 African countries that had matured by the end of 2021. So where did the idea of a debt trap really come from? The controversy broke out in 2022 when media outlets Quartz and The Economic Times reported that China might take over Uganda's Entebbe International Airport if it failed to make a timely payment on a loan that it had taken out to upgrade and expand the airport. China, however, debunked this myth by stating that it would never do anything that it considered so heinous, and China's Export-Import Bank explained that the revenue generated by the Entebbe International Airport was to be used to repay the loan. Rounding up, to be able to develop essential infrastructure to support their growing population, African countries need external funding. They require between $130 and $170 billion annually to build adequate infrastructure and therefore need allies that can help them finance their infrastructure projects. According to the African countries themselves, Chinese efforts in Africa should be supported instead of being viewed with suspicion. So what about the debt trap theory then? All evidence suggests that it's nothing more than pure speculation. If you liked this, please don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and do subscribe to stay tuned for whenever future videos come out. You can also support me by buying me a coffee. I'll put the link in the description box below. Until next time, goodbye.